Welcome you all to this month's edition of the Police and Crime Committee meeting. Our main business in this meeting this morning will be to discuss counter-terrorism in London and as we emerge from the COVID-19 restrictions. Of course, today marks the anniversary of this 7/7 attacks in London, and I just wanted to pay tribute to the 56 people who died and the 784 people who were injured, and all the emergency services and indeed the public who worked in that situation to make London safer. The 7/7 attack stands as a permanent reminder of why sessions like this are vital to the future safety of London, and that we must learn the lessons from all of the events that London has seen itself survive through. But having said that, let's move on to today's formal business. Later in the meeting, we'll be discussing the findings of the Daniel Morgan Independent Panel report as well. That's the second part of our meeting, and we'll release you as guests before that happens. Could you please make sure that your electronic devices are off on silent, please, so we have no unnecessary interruptions. Can I now ask our clerk, Lauren Harvey, if there are any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies have been received from Assembly Member Moema, for whom Assembly Member Cooper is substituting, Assembly Member Rogers, for whom Assembly Member Fortune is substituting, and apologies for lateness have been received from Assembly Member Duval.
Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out in item 2 and ask members if they have any other interests to declare?
Chair.
Can we confirm the minutes of the Police and Crime Committee held on the 9th of June 2021 to be signed by me as a correct record?
Agreed.
Can we note the ongoing actions arising from the previous meetings of this committee?
Noted.
Thank you. We can now move on to our main item of business, which is the question and answer session with invited guests on counter-terrorism in London. I'd like to welcome our guests, starting with Commander Richard Smith, Head of Counter-Terrorism Command in the Met Police. Chief Superintendent Dawn Morris, OCU Commander, Protective Security Operations, Met Police. Kenny Bowie, Director of Director of Strategy and MPS Oversight, MOPAC. Oliver Levinson, Head of Countering Violent Extremism Programme, MOPAC, and Robin Merritt, Head of Operational Oversight, MOPAC. We'll now move to our opening questions, which will follow to the tradition of the Chair taking that privilege. Can I start my question with Richard Smith, please? Are the 4Ps approach delivering a safer London? For those who don't know what the 4Ps are, they're part of the contest regime to make sure that we have prevent, pursue, protect and prepare. So are they making for a safer London?
I certainly think so. We've been working to the 4Ps structure now for a number of years. It's well understood, and it is my view that the 4Ps interact very well. If we consider prevent for a moment, and we know that, of course, Sir William Shawcross is conducting an independent review of prevent at present, I would comment that whilst I await with interest the result of that review, if we didn't have prevent as it was now, we would want to put in place something that performed the same function. I think it's absolutely critical that we look at where terrorists come from, how they seek to radicalise vulnerable people and draw them into some of their hateful ideologies, and how we address the causes of that and ask people to disengage. That seems to me to be, of the 4Ps, probably the most important for the long-term protection of this city. Pursue is where the vast majority of my time is spent, in seeking to disrupt plots to attack London and Londoners, and indeed support colleagues across the UK and elsewhere in that endeavour. But if we can prevent people from engaging in those ideologies in the first place, that of course is incredibly valuable work. Now, the investment that we make into Pursue, I wouldn't want anybody to underestimate how challenging it is to prevent attacks taking place and to pursue and bring to justice those people that are plotting to attack people in this country. But we do recognise with that challenge that we also need to make it as hard as possible for them to carry out attacks. And that's where Protect comes in. Target hardening, if you will, but multi-layered in the approach that we take to that. And I don't think we can ever be complacent around it. And Dawn beside me works extremely hard on all elements of that. And then to prepare in the sad event that an attack does happen, to be in a position to respond to it quickly and effectively, to train, to exercise across all of the agencies. That's how the 4Ps stack up and interact. It's been my experience that, as I said, they are well understood, and they offer us a really helpful framework for learning as well. The one thing that characterises our approach to countering terrorism in this country is our willingness to learn, I'd say. Certainly since 2017, for example, with the Operation Improvement Review and the improvements that we've seen, the recommendations from Lord Toby Harris's report, for example, and more recently Fishmongers Hall, and I expect you to have a huge amount of interest in the findings of the juries from those inquests. But I think the 4Ps offers that opportunity to us and enables us to learn and improve what we do for this city.
Can I direct my second question to Oliver and Kenny and Robin as well? What have been the main successes and challenges associated with the Prevent strategy in London? Just give us a flavour of what the challenges have been and of the successes.
I'll start and then I'll maybe hand over to Ollie on that. I think, so Prevent, I think the first thing I would say is I would agree entirely with what Richard had said, in that Prevent is clearly very important, and if something like that didn't exist, it is something which you would want to come up with as a system. Since 2017, when the Mayor launched his Countering Violent Extremism Review, we have launched the Shared Endeavour Fund, where we've supported a number of local organisations, and we've just launched a second call with another £400,000 of money to support people in that. And I think we have also been successful in one of the recommendations, for example, from that CVE report from the Mayor, was to look at a regional structure for Prevent. That is something which the Home Office is now taking active steps to move towards. And in fact, in the Home Office's eyes, they are of the view that London is perhaps in a better place than other regions of the UK because of the work which has been done in that respect. Ollie, is there anything you would like to?
Yeah, thanks, Kenny, and certainly would echo perspectives that have already been presented, which is that you do have to have a preventative part of any counter-terrorism strategy. It's really important to stop people becoming or supporting terrorists. As Kenny said, in the aftermath of what was unprecedented spate of perpetrated and foiled terrorist activity in 2017, the Mayor did deliver a countering violent extremism programme, which was an engagement and review exercise, which was the most comprehensive citywide engagement and review exercise in this policy area ever. And within that programme, we did a full and frank assessment of Prevent, and I think it's important to start with the success of Prevent, which there have been successes, and we heard a lot about that. So we heard about success of improvements for frontline practitioners around their engagement with the strategy. And I think the most acute evidence of success is we met a lot of people that had participated with the Prevent programme in capacity building sessions, but also through bespoke intervention processes as part of the Channel intervention programme. And their lives really have been changed and saved through that programme. But I think it's also fair to say that there have been failures. Parsons Green, there was a lot of learning around the management of the individual who perpetrated that attack, and the processes around Channel, which I would say have subsequently been improved and strengthened. But there are continuing challenges, and we wouldn't have an independent review of Prevent, and we would welcome the independent review of Prevent if there weren't continuing challenges, and we must challenge ourselves to to persuade that strategy to continue to improve. And I think some of the challenges for me, Kenny's touched upon one big one, which is this realisation that the threat from extremism does not recognise those invisible boundaries that separate our towns and cities or local authority areas. And so the prioritisation model that Prevent has previously encompassed through its local delivery arm needs to change, and that's a recognition that's certainly agreed with now within central government, and they're looking to change that with a new regionalisation model. But I think there is also another big challenge, which is the buy-in from communities around Prevent. And so whilst we met a number of people within our programme who were engaged and aware of Prevent, they knew about it, they believed in it, they knew how to make a referral if they spotted the indicators that somebody might be vulnerable to radicalisation. We also met a lot of people that weren't aware, didn't know how to spot the indicators, didn't know where to go to get help. And we also met some people that were sceptical, mistrustful of it, and that has to change. And I think the low numbers of referrals from community cohorts, friend and family members needs to improve, and that would be a significant area that we would like to see improved going forward.
Okay, you talked about the review. Have you submitted any evidence to the review, and what do you consider the key challenges that should be made? You've outlined some of them, but has any evidence been submitted?
Yeah, so I mean, our programme was very well timed insofar as we delivered our final report just as the first iteration of the review under Lord Carlisle came together. So we submitted the findings of our programme in full to the review. But we've also submitted a submission from MOPAC as well, which through their portal, which responds to their questions specifically. I think the main points of improvement and the evidence around those improvement needs are submitted within both those elements of our reporting, and we've had a good relationship with the review, and as I've said, a lot of the stuff that we're talking about our review programme happening in 2018, so a lot of the evidence we've submitted, we were very clear to central government and said, you can't wait for the review to make these changes. These are immediate things that could be dealt with immediately. And to be fair, the wheels are moving around improvements, and we've seen a number of improvements across that piece going forward. But yeah, I think there are still areas of improvement of which I think everybody recognises.
Again, to anybody in MOPAC who could think they can pick up this next question, what are you doing to ensure that the public remain vigilant? Because as we get further and further away from an attack, we've had also the lockdown restrictions as well. It looks like people are not focused on this issue like maybe we were some years ago. What are you doing to make sure that level of vigilance remains?
So I think there are a few things I would highlight there. The first is that the Mayor regularly amplifies messages from CT policing and other colleagues around all of this. You'll see, for example, on TFL, lots of examples of that. We have also worked in the CVE programme, the report from 2018. As a result of that, there was the Act Early campaign, which came out from that, and then as a result of an exercise which was run, there has been the I Report It app, which has come out, which was a direct result of work done by MOPAC and City Hall, which is in operation and which allows members of the public to report directly into CTP and the CT Internet Referral Unit in an anonymous way, and that has had some very positive results. In fact, in a recent briefing with the now previous AXO, Neil Basu, he said to the Mayor himself that he had been very pleased with that, and that it had led to a higher number and higher quality referrals than some other platforms, similar platforms had. So I think that would be what has been done.
Can I just interject there quickly? You say things like the I Report It app. How many downloads has that had? What kind of engagement does it get? Who downloads it? Who uses it?
Yeah, so it's an app that was born of the Mayor's Civic Innovation Challenge. So one of the findings in our programme's report was that extremists and terrorists are adept at using the internet to promote their vile ideologies, and that isn't a light bulb moment for anybody, but it's an important recognition that we've known that, and perhaps we've not been able to shift the dial on that sufficiently. But we also recognise the really good work of the Counter-Terrorism Internet Referral Unit within policing, who are able to facilitate the removal of online terrorist content. And so when the opportunity for us to work with the Civic Innovation Fund, Civic Innovation Challenge came up, we jumped at the chance, and we set a challenge around trying to create a technological advancement solution that would increase the quantity and quality of referrals to the Counter-Terrorism Internet Referral Unit. We also had some commissioned research which told us that Londoners wanted to play a part in facilitating the removal of online terrorist content, but didn't know how to do that. I think as little as 15% of Londoners knew actually how to facilitate the removal of content. So the app was created as part of that process. Obviously, as I said earlier, invisible boundaries are not respected, particularly around online threat. And so it was an app that was available to anybody in across the UK, any member of the public. So in terms of download numbers, because the data is owned by the Counter-Terrorism Internet Referral Unit, I think I would have to speak to them about a willingness to put forward that data. What I can tell you around specific statistics is that in the 3-month pilot, which was the project management aspect from MOPAC's end, referrals into the Counter-Terrorism Internet Referral Unit increased by 15% in real terms through the app's content. So there was a real-term increase.
Okay, thank you. The Counter-Terrorism Policing Unit has developed a number of videos and advice on attending sporting events, musical festivals, whatever. How well has this material been received?
There's a whole toolkit that the comms team have put together in order to ensure that the public remain vigilant, as you say, especially as we see hospitality reopen and stadiums and events come online. With regards to the number of hits on the video, we can refer it back to the comms team and get those numbers sent back through to you, because I don't have the data. But it is something that is constantly refreshed to make sure we're alive to the different easements and different events that are coming online. And a new campaign was released only a couple of weeks ago in line with the Euros, and then soon after that to follow, we know that there's a wider public vigilance campaign that's due to come out soon after that in line with the 19th of July. But we can happily share some figures which we can get through to you afterwards.
And maybe some sort of qualitative idea. How people receive videos, are they scary? Do people find them useful? That kind of thing. I'll direct this at Richard. How successful has counter-terrorism policing been in getting London businesses to talk about show, run, hide, and to tell their staff? Have they been able to convey this message?
So I think I'll start my answer pre-COVID, because clearly the last 15 months have had such a significant effect on London businesses. And certainly prior to that, our engagement with business in London, I felt, was extremely positive. Even before the formal launching of consultation around a protect duty, London businesses were talking to us about what that might look like and how they may engage with it. Post-COVID, as we have entered easement, there have been opportunities for us that I think we probably wouldn't have had before as we went into unlocking, to discuss such things as pavement licences being linked to counter-terrorism police advice and protect advice. And my sense is that the businesses have engaged with that really positively and enthusiastically, and potentially because there is such a drive from business to reopen, and therefore there's an opportunity for us to engage and say, this is what we would like you to see as you reopen. And certainly the engagement I have seen from them has been positive. They want to reopen, and they're happy to do so with a CT focus, thinking carefully about the safety of their customers. I think as easement happened, as we had the findings from Fishmongers Hall, I think possibly the communications around that helped as well. But the overall sense is very positive from London businesses.
Thank you. And my last question to you, Richard, would be, AC Neil Basu said that Prevent needs to be more transparent and community-led. How can this be done?
So I agree with Neil about the importance of transparency. We are very, very clear that it is communities who defeat terrorism. And one of my great concerns around Prevent is where we receive our referrals from, or more particularly where we don't. So we see about a third of our referrals from policing itself. We see around a third of our referrals coming from education, and of course they're now picking back up since children went back to school. The remaining third are from a variety of sources, but only 2% come from families. And yet we know from casework that very often families will be the first to notice that something is wrong, and yet such a low number actually refer them on. Some of that, I think, is driven by fear of referring a family member, and I'll just comment that we do have younger and younger people now who are arrested in connection with terrorism offences, but those numbers are tiny compared to those numbers who are referred, which is 100 times higher. The vast majority of people who are referred to Prevent certainly will not be arrested, and interventions to help them will be put in place. So getting the confidence is key. Our Act Early campaign that was mentioned earlier is the central tenet of that. There are resources online, and we have communicated that widely through a variety of channels, urging people who are closest to vulnerable people and people who may be radicalised, and showing them the way to engage. So Act Early is our mainstay to deliver what you've just discussed.
Thank you. Susan, do you want to go? No. Okay.
Yes, just very briefly, just picking up back on the run, hide, tell message, because it's a very, very clear message, but it's actually not what people did at Fishmongers Hall. But obviously you can't tell people to do what people did at that incident. So what, yes, is run, hide, tell still your clear message to the public, and are you putting that out more now that things are opening up more?
So yes, we are. Run, hide, tell is still the message. We have given a great deal of thought. We've looked at models around the world and other messages that are used in other countries, but we are very, very clear that run, hide, tell is the advice to any member of the public that finds himself caught up in a terrorist attack. That said, I pay tribute to the incredible bravery of members of the public who intervened at Fishmongers Hall and who undoubtedly saved lives. They were incredibly brave, and nothing in our messaging is critical of anybody that chooses to do that. But in terms of our advice, it is very much run, hide, tell. And as we unlock, you're quite right, our messaging includes all of that, both on a national level and in London.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Pigeon.
Said you talked about the I Report It app. You said it had gone up 15% in real terms. From what to what? Can we actually have some concrete numbers? And what is the status of the app? As you said, it was a trial for 3 months. Is it still in operation, please?
In terms of statistics, I think I would need to speak to the Counter-Terrorism Internet Referral Unit before submitting them, because the statistics are owned by them, and it would be unfair for me to set those out. It's based on performance of the number of referrals into the system prior to the app and post the 3-month pilot. So during that 3-month pilot, 15% uplift on the number of referrals that they were getting. So the number of referrals that were coming into the Counter-Terrorism Internet Referral Unit through the traditional portal has maintained the same, it's stayed level, but they've had a 15% uplift through referrals through the app itself. Thank you for asking about the continuation of the app. So Counter-Terrorism Internet Referral Unit, who are our public service partner in the Mayor's Civic Innovation Challenge, we're very, very happy with the performance of the app, want to continue to deliver it. They're looking at continuing to license that app for 12 months, but have immediately put in place a 3-month continuation so that continuation is seamless. So the app continues to exist, can continue to be downloaded and can continue to be used.
Thank you.
Terrorism Unit and ask for those stats. Can I move on to Assembly Member Devonish?
Thank Question starts with the Commander. Good morning. How has the COVID-19 affected the nature of the terrorist threat here in London, please?
Good morning, thank you. So I'll give you my initial impression. I think it will be some time before we are really clear about all of the effects that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on every element of our business. Certainly in terms of arrests, for example, we saw a significant reduction in the number of arrests for terrorism during the pandemic. That's not, emphatically, not to say that the threat reduced. That's much more about the limitations on activity of potential terrorists that COVID lockdown brought. So in terms of the threat itself, I have seen no reduction. Certainly, as we come out of lockdown, there is a sense that the tempo of activity has risen. I'm not saying that the threat is substantially greater. The threat level at the moment for the UK rests at substantial and has done since February when we stepped down from severe. But that still means an attack is likely. And that assessment from JTAC feels to me to be absolutely right for what I'm seeing. So we're now seeing the tempo of activity rising, and therefore the tempo of our activity countering it rising commensurately. What we have also seen during the pandemic, we referred earlier to prevent referrals. We saw a significant decline in prevent referrals during the pandemic. A lot of that was because vulnerable people, particularly the young, and about 58% of our referrals are young people under 20. But they simply were not in settings where professionals would see them and spot the signs of radicalisation. So that's why we saw a reduction in referrals. My concern, my very strong concern, is during that period, young, vulnerable people were cut off from other activities, perhaps spent more time online. We've just been talking about the material that is sadly still available online to them and the efforts that terrorists make to radicalise vulnerable people and draw them into their vile ideologies. So whilst we don't have numbers to put against this yet, I suspect that one of the impacts of the pandemic has been to leave young people at greater risk of radicalisation and vulnerable people at greater risk of radicalisation online, and it's only as we unlock an activity then rises that we will see what that has meant for them as we get more referrals into prevent. And that goes alongside what is now becoming better documented in terms of the impact of the pandemic and lockdown on people's mental health generally. And there I'm not saying that mental illness and terrorist ideology are corroborated necessarily one way or the other, but they're certainly not mutually exclusive. And I think there's a real toxic mix that we may see as we come out of the pandemic in terms of the numbers of people who have been at risk of radicalisation. And I am therefore very keen to see the number of referrals into prevent increase so that we can engage with those people and direct them onto more productive pathways.
Thank you. And this is for the rest of the MOPAC team, and it's many of these points have just been touched on by the Commander. How have COVID-19 lockdown restrictions affected the spread of extremism in London and among particular groups of Londoners, and what actions are you taking to address that? Who wants to start?
So I'll start by saying basically what Richard has said is our understanding, because we obviously take our advice from the experts on this, and the experts are CT policing. So certainly our concern in MOPAC, and I know the Mayor's concern, is around the number of young people or otherwise vulnerable people, including with mental health issues, as Richard said, who will have spent a large amount of time, possibly by themselves, possibly on the internet, and looking at a whole range of things, some of which might not touch the CT threshold and maybe in the hate crime space, right up to some of the horrendous Daesh-inspired or extreme right-wing videos online, and the inability of people to spot that and take appropriate early action. So that is certainly something which, as a result of interactions we regularly have with CT policing, that we are very concerned about. We obviously engage with the London Prevent Board where that is discussed, and this gets discussed regularly and was indeed discussed at the last London Contest Board where we looked at the activity happening. And as I said, we've recently launched the second round of the Shared Endeavour Fund, where we are looking to partner ourselves with local community organisations to help in that sort of space. Ollie, is there anything you would add to that?
So I think when you're talking about countering terrorism, countering extremism, it's often quite I guess a complex and contested space, but everybody is in agreement that that the risk has potentially gone up in this period, and I think we should absolutely listen to that, and that's across the board. Everybody's saying the same thing, so we should take note. In terms of things that we've done about it, that I report it at Pilot was well timed, with people online for longer. We have a Shared Endeavour Fund, which is a grant fund for civil society groups delivering projects which counter hate extremism and radicalisation. We were able to work very hard with that cohort of over 30 project deliverers to make sure that we shifted them both in a practical sense, so that their delivery was moved to virtual within social distancing confinements, but also that their projects were flexing towards some of the key priorities which we are facing during this challenging period, things around online radicalisation, for example. We also have something that we call the Shared Endeavour Network, which is a coalition of civil society partners who stand against hate extremism and terrorism, and we've been able to work with that cohort to provide key priority mitigations. So for example, we've been delivering free workshops on fake news. We've seen a lot of fake news in this period, not just around extremism but around all sorts of issues, which has led to a greater polarisation and I would argue a greater risk. And we've also been able to convert our delivery around our convening function. So we've often had some great success around convening practitioners, stakeholders, civil society organisations to work on some of these issues, and we've converted that to a webinar-based convening position throughout this period to continue that work. We've also delivered a lot of work around places of worship protective security. That began as a programme in the aftermath of the devastating attack in Christchurch, New Zealand, where within 4 days of that attack we convened over 300 mosque leaders from across London to hear safety and security advice from the police and key leading security experts. We held another event within a week of the devastating attacks in Sri Lanka around Easter, and we've continued that provision of work, which is really, really important because we've seen places of worship at risk during this period. We've seen extremists promote harm against places of worship and their worshippers throughout this period, so that's been really, really important, and we've converted that to online delivery.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Good morning, Richard. Very nice to see you. In a different hat, in a different guise. I just wanted to come back to this whole issue of the impact of the lockdown arrangements on the potential lone actor who may have been spending a lot of time alone online, interacting with possibly very hateful material, fake news, computer games that are very violent, all that sort of thing. You said that there has been a drop in referrals from schools because obviously there was non-attendance at schools for a period, and also from religious institutions because obviously we were locked down. Is there any evidence of an increase in referrals, and also have you been able to do any monitoring of people who are spending extended periods looking at this extremely hateful material that might well lead to radicalisation? Because I think we know that as well as the sort of the groups that radicalise, there is also the potential for people to become individually radicalised without any input really, other than just watching repeated dreadfulness in their own room.
Thanks, Leonie. And you make some really good points about what we used to refer to as lone actors. The fact is, it is rare that somebody acts entirely alone. In this, in the current world, people are either radicalised by others, and through their interactions online very often, but also in the real world, but also can self-radicalise through the material that they then find. But that material is still placed there by someone. So we are firstly keen to receive more referrals, and I can reassure we are seeing more referrals now. In particular, children return to schools, but also into faith settings and elsewhere. But it's the schools that we've seen the really big uptick. What colleagues in education are seeing, though, is young people who have really struggled through lockdown, potentially with their mental health, as I've said, but also have been exposed to this material online with no checks and balances, and limited interactions from any professionals to stop them looking at this or to put it into context for them. So there is certainly a risk there, but we are seeing increased referrals, and that's welcome. If we receive a referral, we will of course intervene through Prevent. Around a quarter of people referred into Prevent will actually go into Channel Panel. A quarter are well-meaning referrals but result in no further action. And the remaining 50%, there will be some form of intervention, but it may not be from a counter-terrorism perspective or counter-radicalisation perspective. We do also investigate those who place the material online, and you will have seen that we've had recent prosecutions in that respect. So if people are promoting, passing on, creating some of this material online, then we will investigate them robustly and seek to prosecute whenever we can.
Well, it's great to know that the referrals are increasing now that there's been people going back to school. And I'm heartened to hear that you think that the lone actor is more of a rarity than somebody who's very frequent. I guess I am slightly concerned because there have been so many people locked down for such an extended period that the lone actor might be, and they're really hard then to spot because you can't find those sort of links and tentacles online between people who are, potentially making the kind of arrangements that we subsequently found out. We're here on the anniversary of 7/7, and once it was traced back, you could see that there had been arrangements being made. So I guess I'm having a concern that there may be more lone actors that we've been breeding during this period, if I can put it in that way.
So I should clarify my comments. We now refer to self-initiated terrorists rather than lone actors because there will be other factors that affect them. A malign influence, if you like, from somewhere or someone, which means they're not entirely isolated. They may not be directed by others. They may not be actively plotting with others, but they're inspired by something or someone's material. You are absolutely right about the incredible challenge of spotting that. We've been consistently investigating more terrorist offences since 2017, and it remains high. Runs at around 800 current investigations in the UK, and a very substantial proportion of that is in London. I won't put a number on it here, for lots of obvious reasons around the fact that we're a capital city and so on. But the numbers of people under investigation between ourselves and our primary partner in MI5 are very significant, and there is also a very large number of closed subjects of interest who may still pose a residual threat. And that is alongside nominals we know about who we have placed into prison, who've been later released, and they've either been in prison as Terrorism Act offenders, or they've gone in for a non-Terrorism Act offence, but nonetheless pose a terrorist risk. So you're right to say it is a huge challenge. And I opened today saying I wouldn't want anyone to be complacent, neither the public nor any of our partners, about the scale of the threat. We may not be seeing the dreadful succession of offences that we saw in 2017, but there have been 29 well-developed plots disrupted since then, largely a mixture of right-wing and Islamist terrorist plots. And alongside that, many investigations where we have intervened before they have got that far. And we have to work extremely hard all of the time to try and scan and pick up those people who pose the most immediate threat so that we can do something about that with the resources we have. We desperately need communities to be engaged on this. We desperately need everyone to be alert, not unduly alarmed, but alert, and to be confident in reporting suspicions to us, every single one of which we will investigate and follow down, and many of which are extremely helpful. So yes, the scale is hugely challenging. The effort that's put into it is enormous, and I pay tribute to the partners we work with in the progression we've seen over the last 20 years of the trust and confidence we have, particularly with partners in the UK intelligence community, but also with everyone else that we now work with in health, in local authorities, in City Hall and elsewhere. But it's communities that we really need to be engaged on this, to be alert, to report suspicions, and to be confident about the response that they will get.
Thank you, Richard. That's really helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Can I move on to Assemblymember Pigeon, please?
My question is also to Commander Smith. I mean, we've been talking about the use of online for materials and so on, but obviously it's how people communicate with each other, and obviously some of these online platforms now use end-to-end encryption, I think including things like PlayStation, so gaming, as well as WhatsApp that perhaps many of us are more used to. So what concerns do you have about this sort of facilitating extremism and radicalisation, and what discussions are you having with providers around this?
So I am enormously concerned about the enthusiasm of service providers to move to end-to-end encryption, and in particular to forms of end-to-end encryption which mean that even the service provider cannot look at the content of those communications. I completely understand the appetite that people have for privacy, personal privacy, and I think that's absolutely right and to be defended. But what end-to-end encryption permits is a dark space where terrorists, those people who exploit and abuse children sexually or criminally, can operate with impunity. And so what we seek is the ability to investigate terrorists and, for my colleagues elsewhere in policing, to investigate those who cause really serious harm. And I am deeply concerned about any move to end-to-end encryption where there is no opportunity to investigate whatsoever, and the bar is high, and where potentially commercial interests are put ahead of public safety. That really troubles me. We are, of course, engaged with service providers. They are in many ways good partners to us in terms of investigations. But on this issue, I am extremely concerned about the direction of travel and the implications of that, and very keen to see stakeholders who are able to amplify that message and engage with service providers and explain the concerns about public safety, to do so, and to do so strenuously.
So are you getting anywhere with the service providers, or do you feel it's going in the other direction, and is government involved with you in those discussions as well? Because they must be concerned, I'm sure.
So the concerns I've expressed, I think, are widely shared in City Hall and in central government, and there is engagement with the service providers from a practitioner level, from CT Policing and our partners, and also from political partners as well.
Good. Okay, so that's a watch this space almost. It's clearly
a
very live discussion, and you're right, it applies to child abuse and sexual exploitation as well as counter-terrorism. Could I just ask, you've been talking, maybe this would be MOPAC, you're talking about the webinars and all the other stuff that you're doing. What work are you particularly doing with teachers and parents around that? Are you doing some webinars that you mentioned specifically for them to look at the signs, what resources are available in order to help parents and teachers particularly?
So obviously, you're quite right. That's a really important cohort that I think we would like to see better engaged, and we made that point in our programme's final report, and I think there has been a lot of good work that's happened subsequently from partners. I think the Act Early work is really, really good. There is a website called Educate Against Hate, which has been around for a while but has improved in terms of its content. That provides a lot of support. There's been good partnerships with policing and NSPCC. Those are all things that we look to amplify. We also look, I think, to local government, who has a stronger connectivity than I would say perhaps City Hall does in terms of schools, and we've made recommendations that through those central government funded practitioners, there are things called preventing education officers that sit within priority areas in London, so probably over 2/3 of London authorities have those education officers, and we very much talked about the importance of those officers engaging parents within the school community and not just focusing on the students at schools, and I think there has been a lot of work around that. And of course we have tried to do our bit as well through our grantees in terms of the Shared Endeavour Fund. We have a number of projects that work specifically with parent communities, some projects that work specifically with marginalised women, mothers, and we've obviously used those levers to really push the awareness raising, capacity building and signposting to where help and support can be sought.
Lovely, thank you. And finally, Commander Smith, obviously you've mentioned the increase in right-wing terrorist threat, and more groups are being added to the list of prescribed right-wing hate groups in the UK. What action is the Met taking to ensure that no officers or staff are members of such organisations once they've been added to these lists?
So you'll be aware that we have, for the first time in the UK, prosecuted Ben Hannam, who was then a serving police officer, for membership of National Action. I should point out he was a member of National Action before it was prescribed. He continued to be a member of it after prescription, but he ended his association with them before joining the Metropolitan Police. Nonetheless, as part of a wider investigation into extreme right-wing terrorism, we identified he was a member of the police service, and then took immediate action, and he was arrested and prosecuted. Questions have been asked around vetting procedures, about whether or not vetting procedures were tight enough. I do not think that vetting procedures would have been sufficient to have identified that. It was a detailed counter-terrorism investigation which identified Ben Hannam and took action against him. And there is a balance to be struck, I think, around what is proportionate and necessary in our recruiting process, the depth to which we need to fully investigate the backgrounds of individuals coming into the police. So clearly there has to be a proportionate approach. I think the balance has been struck right. Ben Hannam is an isolated case, an appalling isolated case, but nonetheless an isolated case, and one that was very quickly addressed whilst he was still in his probation and related to his activities before joining the Met. I'm not convinced that it would be proportionate to or even practicable to really dig into the backgrounds of individuals applying to join the Metropolitan Police to the extent that we had to in order to identify Ben Hannam as a previous member of a prescribed group.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll leave it there.
Come over to Assembly Member Fortune.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Just following up from Assembly Member Pigeon, there's been lots of talk about how the increasing use of online platforms are, providing conduits through to radicalisation. But where else and how is radicalisation happening?
I'll pick that up. I think the first thing to say is that vulnerability to radicalisation is not confined to any particular community. It's not confined to any particular group of people. We do tend to see a greater proportion of referrals into Prevent, for example, being younger people but it can span across all age groups and all communities. Every case is different. There are some cases we see, and we've talked a lot about online radicalisation, the abhorrent material that is available online, and the activity of the CTIIU, the CT Internet Referrals Unit, to remove that content once it's found. And certainly online plays a part. Sometimes it's the only place where somebody's been radicalised. Sometimes it is just a part, and maybe it is a real-world contact who refers somebody and says, you might want to look at this, I will send it on to you, or I will tell you where to find it. Those real-world contacts can come from pretty much anywhere. So whether that is a contact through school, another family member, friend, or somebody that's encountered through any, a sporting group, a faith-based institution. Every case is different, and we will seek to investigate robustly wherever evidence leads us to identify those people who seek to radicalise others.
I'll tell you what made me think about that was when you were talking about self-initiators, which I hadn't sort of come across before. So you're going to have a different sort of development process, aren't you? So somebody that looks at some online content and then moves into a secure end-to-end encryption conversation, that's somebody who's speaking with somebody. Then there's others who are watching content and get the idea to do it themselves. And then there are others who join a group or move into sort of an organised way of doing it. And I guess there's different approaches to each of them. Would that be right?
Yeah, that would be right. And that forms the basis of my comments to Leonie earlier around the sheer scale of the challenge. And we and our partners need to have the ability to spot this activity when it's taking place and then identify those people who pose the greatest risk in order to put our resources against them. It is an enormous challenge.
Yeah.
We are severely behind time. I'd like to take that into account. And can I ask everybody to speak up into their microphones, because they are not the best microphones in the world. Away you go, Peter.
I'll get back on script. Looking at the terrorist attacks over the past couple of years from 2005, and I was there that day clambering off the district line. What's changed from then through 17, 19, 20? How do the holistic operations in CT, how have they changed?
So I would characterise that as a progression over the last 2 decades of becoming a far closer and more integrated counter-terrorism partnership than we ever were before. So within the Metropolitan Police, there were 2 units dealing with terrorism offences, SO12 and SO13. There now is only one, SO15. Our relationship, our working relationship with the UK intelligence community has got stronger, more integrated, based on really enormous trust and access to one another over the last 20 years. And I think the next and a really significant logical step to that is the new CT Operations Centre at ESB. That, in my view, is not just a logical next step for us, it's a hugely important and profoundly beneficial next step to have us. We already work very closely together, but to be in that building all working against this in such an integrated way is an enormous step forward. And you will have seen the Home Secretary and the Mayor both at the Eval quite recently. But that for me is how I would characterise our moves forward. In the most recent years, I referenced earlier the Operational Improvement Review after 2017. The recommendations out of that, again, which the CT Operations Centre reflects, was all about closer working. Information in this arena is absolutely critical. The passing of it, the understanding of it, the analysis of it, and therefore the closer we work with our partners, the stronger we are. At the root of all of this, though, is the information that comes in. And I go back once again to the fact that I would not want anyone to be complacent about the risk and the threat. And I would urge members of the public, whether they have concerns about a family member or they're just suspicious about something that doesn't feel right, to get in touch with us and let us know, because it is that information from communities that is the lifeblood of our counter-terrorism work.
And I think you said earlier that every single referral would be investigated. So my last question, Chair, would be around capacity to perform this function. And if I could be cheeky, morale as well. How's that?
So, okay, I'll deal with the capacity issue first. I've outlined the scale of the challenge and the risk of complacency around this. It is enormously hard work to keep London and the UK safe from the number of people who might seek to do us harm. Of course, we could always do more with more resources, but we understand that that needs to be proportionate. In terms of morale, the sense of mission within counter-terrorism work, so counter-terrorism policing nationally and within SO15 in the Met, but also within the whole of the partnership, that sense of mission, being able to look out the window and think that you are working to keep people safe, is so tangible, and that is what keeps morale very high. There are undoubtedly tough days. Most recently, the attacks that we saw in the tail end of 2019 and the beginning of 2020, there are very tough days, but I would characterise morale as high based on that real tangible sense of mission that people have working in this world.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you to Commander Smith. Following on from what you've just said, I think we all owe you a great amount of gratitude, especially for the 29 well-developed plots that you've obviously disrupted. So thank you to you and all of your colleagues on that. Do you agree then with recent comments by Jonathan Hall QC that people who are convicted of attack planning should be given automatic life sentences?
So Jonathan Hall's report and review into MAPA, which has largely been taken forward by the CT Sentencing Act, was welcome. The recommendations in it were welcome. The strengthening of sentencing around terrorist offenders, I do welcome. Many of these offenders have deep-seated and enduring hate-filled ideologies that are very hard to shift. Now, I say many, I'm not saying all, but many of them have enduring ideologies that last a long time. We have sometimes seen offenders who have emerged from prison and gone on to carry out further attacks, and most recently in London we've seen 2 of those. And therefore the sentencing provision that has come within that Act is certainly something I welcome.
Good. Yeah, you and me both. Thank you. Are effective communication structures in place in London to ensure that there is a coordinated response between counter-terrorism police, the London Ambulance Service and the London Fire Brigade?
I think so, yes. I'll perhaps pass over to Dawn in a second around the exercising regime that we have, the joint working that we have, and certainly from my own experience in a number of roles, actually not just this one, the working in London between the emergency services is very close, but we constantly test ourselves, and every event that happens we then seek to learn from, and it's Dawn's area of business, so I'll defer to her if I may on the detail.
As Richard says, yes, across London with the emergency services and other partners, all of the work that we've done in our learning, our debriefs, and then our changes have always been done in a multi-agency way. It's much more structured and has been over the last few years, and we've really learnt that from 2017. As Richard said, from the lessons, we have done a significant amount of exercising, and that's always multi-agency. So it's always that coordinated response, the command, the control. We've been very open to finding the areas that we don't think are right, addressing them, stretching, and making sure we then adjust. So those have been programmes of work for the last 5 years now. And the joint objective for each year on testing, exercising and checking processes is multi-agency across London at all times now.
Okay, yes, and I've seen some of that and it's very good. Are you having problems though with the IT, talking to each other through different IT systems?
We did do, but that has improved quite consistently now. And only a good example was only last Monday we did another smaller style exercise just to work on that command and control piece, because it was still an emerging issue from an exercise we ran in 2019. We weren't convinced we'd absolutely got it right, so we did it again only last Monday. So through the shared channels, those are working well, and through the work that we've done on Airwave, that we do now have a much better communication process for that, all the way through an incident.
Well, that's good news, because I know there was issues there.
Yes.
Back to Commander Smith, I'm sorry again. How are you ensuring that the public are aware of their role identifying possible terrorist behaviour, and how are you using social media to spread these messages?
So I'll refer to some of the materials that we've covered earlier. Both the Mayor's Office amplify some of our messaging. National CT Policing has a communication strategy which goes out on multiple channels, whether that's mainstream media or social media. We have our own social media channels, but also, as does the Met, one of the things that has been quite striking is that following attacks, there are overwhelming returns from the public to say that the Met Police becomes their preferred channel. The Metropolitan Police social media becomes their preferred channel for updates after an attack, and a trusted channel. And I think the value of that is enormous. And then whilst we're thankfully not experiencing an attack, we use those channels to put these messages out, referrals to Act Early, for example, run, hide, tell messaging. So we are very much engaged around multi-channel communications. You can never communicate enough, and we do try very hard, but that's why I'm here today, to try and land that message around we cannot be complacent. We do need communities to engage on this, and anyone that has an opportunity to amplify that message on our behalf, I'm grateful to.
Well, many of us do, and thank you. A very, very quick answer to these, please. In 2019, the UK had the highest number of returning jihads in Europe. Has that stopped now? Are we further down the line, as it were?
So I think all European countries and elsewhere are experiencing the same concerns and pressures around foreign terrorist fighters and returnees, and indeed their dependents and orphans. The numbers are small. We are very much engaged with our partners on tracking that, and we have had a small number who we have managed back into this country and into London. In terms of fighters, anybody that has gone abroad to fight in any of those arenas should expect to be investigated when they return, and they will be.
Good, okay. Only because of time reasons, I'll stop there. I could ask forever. Thank you, Chair.
Please move on to Assemblyman this side.
Good morning, panel. If I can start off with you, Commander Smith, what should be the key priorities for the Mayor's counter-terrorism policy for the next 3 years?
I think that's a matter for the Mayor. In terms of from my perspective, much of it is about public awareness. And I've returned to this theme many times. I wouldn't want anybody to be complacent. The threat is real, and it is immediate. We still have a substantial threat, so an attack is likely, and if it were to occur anywhere, London, I suggest, is one of the principal targets for terrorists in this country. So it is around public engagement and public awareness.
I mean, I know it's a matter for the Mayor and his team, but have you made, or are you considering making any specific recommendations to the Mayor, drawing upon your experience of counter-terrorism?
We're very well engaged with the Mayor and the Mayor's Office. So previously Neil Basu, now Matt Jukes, has a regular bilateral meeting with the Mayor and with the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, and myself and a number of colleagues also go to the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime's contest board on a quarterly basis, where we have very robust discussions around the emerging themes that we're seeing and the priorities that both City Hall and ourselves hold. So I think the conversations are at the right level, I do feel that we are listened to by MOPAC and City Hall.
So on that note, can I turn to MOPAC? Perhaps Mr. Bavi, you might be the right person to answer. It was the same question. What should be the key priorities for the Mayor's counter-terrorism policy for the next 3 years? And how will the new plan reflect the emerging challenges posed by hatred, extremism and terrorism in London?
So I think more detail will come in this when we engage with you all on the policing and crime plan. What I would say is what is in the manifesto and what is clearly set out is, first of all, the two items in the manifesto are around continuing investment in the Shared Endeavour Fund and working with communities to keep us safe. And as Richard has made clear throughout this session, that is clearly of the utmost importance. The second item is that the Mayor has committed to continue to work closely with police, security partners and communities to tackle the threat. Sadly, we can never be 100%, or the police can never be 100% effective in that. So it is to commission an update of the Harris Review into London's preparedness to respond to a major terrorist incident. We are fairly far along in discussions with an individual about taking on that role, and we have had discussions with the Metropolitan Police and with other partners about what the terms of reference for that review should be, and I would hope that in the fairly near future the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime will be in a position to set out a bit more detail on that. In terms of what the Mayor's other priorities would be, I think, as is one of the key responsibilities, it will continue to be his oversight and assurance of the police more generally. What does that mean in this context? I think it means through his meetings, through whether it's the oversight board, whether it's the bilaterals with the Commissioner, the Deputy Commissioner or AXO, making sure that the learning has been taken from all of the inquiries, inquests and other independent reviews, the HMIC FRS reports, and that has been applied in London to keep us safe. I think it's continuing to work with civil society organisations, supporting members of the Shared Endeavour Network. And I think we're continuing to engage, collaborate with our international partners where the Mayor and other cities like Stockholm set up a programme to share peer-to-peer learning and making sure that we are taking the best of what is known internationally and then applied in London. So I think those are the main items for the Mayor over the next few years that I can say at the moment, but I suspect there may be more detail in the police and crime plan as that develops.
If I could just add to that, it's going to be reassuring, hopefully, to the Assembly that all the matters that have been raised so far this morning have been covered in contest board in the last few years. I think that should be a sign of encouragement, and also to reinforce Richard's point that relationships that I have very regular contact with senior officers in the Metropolitan Police on counter-terrorism matters, and there's a kind of a virtually probably not a week goes by without us discussing issues, concerns and priorities. So there's a really good relationship that exists between the Met and MOPAC.
And what is the current delivery timetable for the new police and crime plan?
So the Mayor wants to, as this is a shortened mayoral term, obviously just over 1,000 days, we're hoping to come out and consult on that as soon as is practicable. And according to the legislation, there has to be a police and crime plan in place by the 31st of March next year. We will be aiming to do that sooner than that, and again as soon as it's possible. These are things where it's always impossible to put an exact time frame on it, but hopefully out to consultation in the next few months, and then a plan well ahead of the 31st of March next year in line with the legislation.
Thank you.
Caroline Russell.
Thank you, Chair. Just following up a bit more on the Harris review,
which had 127 recommendations, and I was just wondering what key changes have been made following the Harris review. Who wants to?
Yes, the Harris review came up with 127 recommendations, as you said. All but 2 of them have been resolved to a greater extent. When you look at the issues that were identified by Harris, overall, Lord Harris's findings were one that London was prepared for dealing with Counter-Terrorism Act and well prepared, but there were clearly aspects that could be improved, and such things as protect and how we deal with the protection of buildings and places in London was raised. This included the issue of CCTV. We also looked at how the services work together. Again, really encouraging news about how the 3 emergency services work together. But there was scope for improvement in resourcing levels and communication, which was identified. We have worked with how we get out communications to members of the public as well. One area where we'd like to see more progress, but this is now being taken forward, is through the public warning system, which is operating in several countries in the world, whereby members of the public can get information out very quickly via their mobile phones about a terrorist incident. So a very wide-ranging report, and one we've made wide-ranging progress on virtually all the recommendations.
2, all but 2 resolved. What are the 2 that are unresolved?
The 2 that are unresolved, I would have to refresh my memory to be honest on that.
2 which are unresolved is one about hospital vehicle mitigation and providing a flexible resource for that, where a business case was put into the Home Office but was not accepted.
But my notes say that 33 remain unresolved.
No,
which
no,
is correct. 2 or 33.
So there are two which remain open. There are a number of recommendations, for example, to MHCLG about building regulations, which were not accepted by the government. So there are 2 which are open and sort of ongoing recommendations, if I can put it that way.
I think there's an important distinction here between open and unresolved. My notes say there's 33 unresolved. You've said there's 2 that remain open.
Yeah. So, for example, there was a discussion about whether there should be changes to building regulations, which was a recommendation made by Lord Harris, which would have been for the government to take on board, and the government's view of that was that the building regulations at that time were satisfactory and that it was covered in a different way. So that, I mean, I think we get into sort of questions of definition here. That's not something which we would consider an open recommendation as such anymore, because it's something which is out with our power to actually take forward.
I'm going to stop in the interest of time. I'll be writing to the Mayor, because this would suggest that some of the recommendations left open are for the Mayor to accept, move on or not. But I'll write so we can get greater detail.
Okay, if perhaps we could just go back to the 2, and you've said one of those was the hostile vehicle mitigation, and there's an issue with resource. What's the other one? And
the other one is around CCTV.
I can explain that. There was concerns raised about the extent of CCTV operation in London. As members know, in public spaces, this is largely a matter for local authorities. And members will also be aware that obviously the CCTV in private premises has really been highlighted further in the Manchester Arena attack. And actually, one, there's been some really good work to make sure that the concerns raised in Manchester has been addressed, led by the Metropolitan Police, but also we're hoping that that will feature as part of the protect duty which is coming, which will improve those circumstances.
Thank you. That's really clear. So the Mayor then, in his manifesto, committed to commission a follow-up review from Lord Harris, which has already been mentioned by Assembly Member Desai. And what he said was, the review will consider to what extent the MPS, MOPAC and other London organisations have acted on the relevant recommendations and what gaps remain. So do you see that the gaps remaining are those 2 points that...
So I think it's multifaceted, so those will certainly be 2 points that they'll wish to look at. But since this last report was commissioned, the threat picture will have changed, the modes of attack will have changed, the expectations around the technology will have changed. So there may well be gaps which exist now which were not foreseen, or in fact just which did not even exist back at the time of the original Harris review. And I think what we would want any incoming review to do is not just limit itself to looking at what has happened and what was identified by the Harris review, but equally what has happened and what is the learning that Robin referred to, for example, the Manchester Arena inquiry, where their first volume just came out. But what can we take away from that? What can we take away from the inquests and other investigations that there have been since then? And, for example, the Anderson Operational Improvement Review. So I think that it's not suggesting that those are the only gaps. It's suggesting that we take a fresh look in light of what is a changed and ever-changing threat picture and ever-developing technological position.
Thank you. So, and the terms of reference for that are going to be out soon?
They'll be out as soon as is possible. Obviously, we need to agree them with the reviewer, agree a contract with the reviewer and have that all agreed by the Mayor. As soon as that is the case, you will certainly let the committee know about that.
Thank you. Then my final question, and I'm not quite sure who's going to be best to answer it. I'm sorry, forgive me, I'm new to the committee. But in your opinion, what have been the greatest achievements and challenges in the Countering Violent Extremism programme?
I think if that's a referral to the Mayor's Countering Violent Extremism programme, you're new to the committee. I've been in MOPAC 2 months, so I'll probably hand over to the person who runs the Countering Violent Extremism programme to actually answer that.
Thanks, Kenny, and thanks for the question. I think there's been a lot of success. So I've spoken about some of the successes we've had. To reiterate them, we did deliver the most comprehensive and wide-spanning engagement and review exercise citywide in this policy area ever. That's not just in this country, but that's internationally. Within that, we were able to make a number of recommendations for improved and renewed delivery. Many of those recommendations have been acted upon by the specific authorities we made the recommendations to. We've seen some significant improvements across the piece relating to those recommendations. We also looked inwardly, I think, which was a really quite a unique and important thing at what more City Hall and the Mayor could do to bring additional value to this really, really important policy area. And the Mayor backed those internal recommendations with investment, and we've now operationalised the CV programme. So we are a programme that not only delivers our oversight capacity for the Mayor and Deputy Mayor around what our colleagues in the police are doing, our lobbying capacity around government, so for example important legislation changes like the upcoming online safety bill, which is really, really important. But we also have a convening function, so we've had some really great success in bringing people together under the banner of City Hall. We have held London's first youth radicalisation conference in collaboration with the police. We've hosted the EU Capital City Mayors meeting themed on countering violent extremism. We've held a practitioner conference on right-wing extremism where we brought in experts from Germany to hear from them about how they deal with that ever-growing issue. And of course, we've brought investment as well to civil society groups. We found evidence that often civil society groups are best placed to strengthen communities against extremism, encourage Londoners to stand up to hate and intolerance, better safeguard vulnerable Londoners from radicalisation and stop the spread of hateful ideologies. And we brought investment to the table, not just from City Hall, but we also found matched investment. Google.org supported that initiative by matching the Mayor's investment of £400,000 to create an £800,000 fund, which has funded over 30 projects in the last year across the capital.
Now, my colleague, Assemblymember Ahmed, is actually, her questions following on immediately, so I'll actually hand over straight to you, since it was a sort of segue question.
Thank you very much, Assemblymember Russell. Good morning, panel. Nice to see you here. My questions are for MOPAC, and I'll let you decide who's best to answer these. As you know, £800,000 was allocated for grant funding for grassroots organisations in January. Could you give one or two examples now of where those allocations were made, and perhaps why, to those organisations, and then give us a full list, provide a full list of organisations with how much was provided for each of those organisations, please?
Sure. So some examples. The Shared Endeavour Fund delivered work that counters racism, hate, intolerance, extremism, and radicalisation. It worked across a number of project delivery characteristics. So we had projects that built capacity, we had educational based projects, we had projects that were rooted in sports, projects that were rooted in arts and drama. The direct participants were wide spanning across a spectrum of students. So we had work in primary schools, secondary schools, colleges and universities, but also within community groups, so community youth clubs, community infrastructure. We had projects which countered the array of different extremist ideologies. So we have projects which are rooted in countering right-wing extremism, projects which are rooted in countering Al-Qaeda or Daesh, so-called Islamist extremism, projects which challenge anti-Semitism, projects which challenge anti-Muslim hate, the whole spectrum across those 30 projects. Some examples of the projects: we are supporting an organisation called Exit UK to work in and across London. They are an organisation that are made up of former right-wing extremists who look to build capacity in communities against right-wing extremism, the fastest growing extremist ideology currently. We have work in schools. One of our projects is the Anne Frank Trust, who I'm sure many of you have heard of, who deliver educational based work through the lens of the Holocaust, but also more contemporary manifestations of genocide. We're working with West Ham's Community Foundation and Show Racism the Red Card to deliver counter-racism and extremism workshops in school. There is a full list of the 30 plus projects that we are supporting our grantees on our website, on the .gov website. We haven't apportioned the amount of money that we have delivered to them, and I'm happy to take that away and look at that for you.
Thank you.
Why you wouldn't publish that on your website, but we want that.
Happy to do that.
Thank you, Chair. How are you going to measure the impact of that funding?
Yeah, so that's a really good and important question, and that's always been at the forefront of our thinking. And it is complicated and sometimes challenging to measure the impact of preventative work, but it is not impossible. And we have talked a lot about the importance of the government being transparent, or being more transparent in the evaluation of their prevent projects. So we've put our money where our mouth is, and we've asked for an independent evaluation of our Shared Endeavour Fund portfolio, which is being delivered by the world-leading think and do tank, the Institute for Strategic Dialogue. That will include 5 deep dives on 5 projects within that monitoring and evaluation piece. I expect that independent evaluation to be concluded in the near future, and we will publish it again to make sure that we are being as transparent as we possibly can be, and I will be very happy to share that with you.
Thank you very much. My next question is for MOPAC and for Commander Smith. Can you provide specific examples of the improvements that have been made in counter-terrorism collaboration as a result of the new counter-terrorism operations centre, please?
So I'll answer that one. Although sadly you've stolen my answer, I was going to say the Counter-Terrorism Operations Centre itself is the biggest example of improvements around collaboration. Some of the detail of how we work with our key partners, MI5 in particular, clearly I won't go into here, but in general terms, that building is already operational. So we have our CT Operations Centre in there. We're running operations from within the building now. The Mayor recently visited our ops room to see how that works. The new facilities that the teams are working in are a huge improvement on our previous facilities. They provide space for partner agencies and a range of partner agencies to be working there alongside us live whilst we're conducting operations in a way that we couldn't before. In the longer term, as more and more of the Ops Centre comes online, I think, as I've said before, this is a profound step forward, not just in the speed at which we can process information. And as an example, the next phase to go live will be around our forensics management teams. At present, forensic exhibits have to go to a number of different locations in London. In the new build, a forensic exhibit will come in. It's really complicated around how we do this, but we can process it all within the building. Any information, lines of inquiry, leads, biometrics, data, etc., can then be passed immediately to the teams that need them within that building, processed and passed to the operations room who are conducting and directing our staff out in the field. So that's just incredibly fluid and a huge step forward. More profound still, I think, is just the ability to get people around a problem who bring very different experiences of counterterrorism work to bear, whether that's from policing, from MI5, from our other partners we work with. I think that is the real profound improvement that we will have. Counterterrorism is a team game globally and in the UK, and the trust and confidence within the team that we have in the UK, I think, is unparalleled around the world. And the fact that we can all now move into a building in London to conduct that work, I think is a massive step forward for us.
That's very encouraging to hear, thank you. My final question is for you, Commander Smith. How many referrals have been made through the I Report It app since it was launched in February?
So I think the committee's asked for a written answer on that. The numbers are in the hundreds, and I don't have the current number. Well, certainly in the initial phase, the numbers were in the hundreds, and what we were seeing was not just the fact that we had additional referrals. The referrals that we were getting were of a high quality, i.e. a large proportion of them were going on for further investigation. But I know the committee are going to get a written answer, so I won't commit myself to a number.
Thank you very much.
Assembly Member Hall?
Yes, very briefly. This is to Commander Smith again. Anti-Semitism is on the rise, which is obviously something that must concern us all. Recently, Robert Jenrick, the Community Secretary, said that the revival of Islamist extremism could be fueling this rise in anti-Semitism. Is something that you agree with?
I think that's an extremely difficult question. We are seeing through our referrals into Prevent a number of people who have an Islamist type ideology. We also see people with an extreme right-wing ideology and some others on the extreme left-wing, anarchist, single issue and so on. But we are seeing a growing proportion and a very large proportion of people who have mixed ideologies or actually none at all. People who have some a real determination to conduct violence, indiscriminate violence, but apparently without an ideology that we can identify. But the mixed ideologies are currently getting a huge amount of attention to help us understand what drives that and how those... so first of all, what is it that brings people to have pick and choose their ideologies, or to have two ideologies that appear to be opposed. And then how does that progress through into action, potentially? And more importantly, how do we then divert those people onto a more productive and less harmful path? So I think that the whole of the picture around hate-filled ideologies is incredibly complex, and we're working hard to understand more about it.
Okay, I accept that, but obviously it's something that's got to be dealt with, really. It's also been revealed that William Shawcross, the official reviewer of Prevent, is examining links between Islamist activity and anti-Semitic incidents across the country. So when do you expect that to be completed by?
I'm sorry, we'll give you a written answer. William Shawcross came to the last contest board. I think he shared his timeline with us there, and I'm sorry I can't call it tomorrow.
Fair enough. If you could write, we'd be very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. Assemblymember Cooper.
Thanks, Chair. This sort of goes back a bit to some of the points I was making earlier about coming out of lockdown and the changes that we might be seeing. And obviously there will be certain challenges and risks that we face with certain uptick in reporting and things like that. And obviously, I don't know, I think there might be a football game happening this evening, which might itself be posing some challenges. And I just wondered, as a result of the lifting of the restrictions, are you reviewing the resources that are available to address what goes on, particularly at large events? I mean, we don't want to see a repeat of Manchester Arena, and I'm sure we'll come on to talk about that in a bit more detail in a minute.
So I will pass over to Dawn in a second for some detail around this, but as an anecdote, when I left New Scotland Yard to travel here, I walked out of the building and on my way to the tube bumped into DAC Jane Connor, who's responsible for the policing of the football match you referenced and an awful lot of the large events that take place in this city. And we did briefly exchange conversation around the interaction between counter-terrorism policing and the policing of large events. And without being too glib, London is such a fantastic global city and number one on so many indices, hugely diverse and hugely internationally connected. I think that's what makes the city great. It brings some real challenges around policing, one of which you've mentioned, but I am confident that we give those challenges the right degree of attention, and Dawn has already said we seek to learn continually from every event that happens, and we test and exercise continually as well, because we understand the scale of the challenge that comes with a capital city like this. We're very proud of the city, and we're very proud of what we do to make sure that events like the football can take place safely.
For the policing of events, so the public order commanders, we know, will do the public order aspect, but alongside all of the large events, we do have a protective security plan. That is put in place for every single event that is done, especially the larger scale ones, as you can well imagine. For us around protective security, it's very much around the layering. So there are a huge number of layers of protective security, both with physical, through briefings and advice that will be given, through the servitor deployments, Project Servitor tactics that we use a lot around the behaviours that we talked earlier around what we're seeing with people, and it's a very prevalent tactic that we use a lot across London to look at the behaviours of people and to try and deter and detect. The Euros is a perfect example. This has been in the planning for a long time, as we know, as in started last year. But it's also been alongside the work that we've done of the easement. You talk about easement. We have had progressive protective security plans against each phase. We've been very conscious that we're going to start to see those crowded places come back in, and we have seen quite a demand surge now coming through of events, which we expect to continue. So we're making sure protective security is the absolute centre of the policing plans. That is welcomed by the Met and with all of our partners that we plan those through, and we will continue to make sure protective security is the centre. Tonight is a big one for us, but in fairness, so have all the big music events that we're going to start to see. Stadiums has become a significant issue. Again, we're taking the learning from Manchester, and we've done a lot of proactive work with all of the stadiums in London prior to them opening. So all their security advice, we've been doing reviews of their security and working with all the new staff that we know we're seeing come back from either being furloughed or brand new staff to make sure briefings and awareness are in place.
Just to add to that, there was recently an exercise, a tabletop exercise led by the Counter-Terrorism Preparedness Network, which operates through the LRF, which both the Met and MOPAC were actively involved in, when examples were given from about 15 different really big cities across the world to make sure that best practice was shared in that regard.
I mean, you'll know from my previous question and talking about things being reported through schools and religious institutions that I've got an interest in how well we're able to bring people at the grassroots level, if you like, into that discourse and providing information. Obviously, in terms of policing, the golden thread runs from the dedicated ward officer in my own backyard, down my street, up to, you know, the resources that you might be deploying at specific events. How well are we able to bring those local ward officers into being part of the eyes and ears when we're looking at us unlocking, and in terms of, you know, it might be drugs, but it could also be counter-terror. Are they fully integrated into that and briefed?
So we work very hard on that. I think there's a fundamental point to be made here that counter-terrorism policing in the UK is a network. So we are not a separate agency, as you might find in some other countries. And we are very proud of that because it keeps us grounded in local policing. So, you know, I'm in the same organisation as those PCSOs, as the ward officers, and in our previous setting was a borough commander. So I think that in itself is hugely helpful, that the whole of the national network is staffed by and part of local policing. What that means is the ward officers you're talking about, the PCSOs you're talking about, are a click away from colleagues who work in SO15 and are in the same organisation. And the beauty of CTOC is that means the information that they can collect whilst on their beats out in communities is a click away from the whole of the counter-terrorism apparatus that we will have hosted there. How well does it work? I think that's an area we continually review. I mentioned earlier that around a third of the referrals into Prevent come from policing in one form or another. Some of that is through counter-terrorism police, so dedicated counter-terrorism police, some from local officers. And one of the roles of our local operations teams within SO15 is to be out on the BCUs, in the boroughs, briefing response teams, briefing neighbourhoods teams on the signs to work, to look for. And we also ran a campaign, a training campaign, Act for Policing, specifically targeted at our frontline colleagues to show them what to look for, the signs they should be reporting, and to emphasise the importance of doing so and how easy it is. So the structure is right, but as with anything, it is about continual education, training, and some management information to track the referrals that we get in.
Thanks. The opposite, really. Obviously, we need to get some information from friends and colleagues in other networks abroad. And I'm looking particularly at the moment at the news of what's going on in Afghanistan and the potential for Taliban reoccupying 150 provinces and possibly hosting Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and all sorts of people that you know, might have reason to be involved in terrorism links with this country. How well are we cooperating with the partner agencies and, you know, the Five Eyes and the whole thing across Europe? Are we very much up to speed in terms of the changes in the world? You know, what's been going on in Libya, and that was the link into Manchester. You know, that's a really important side, as well as the out into the wards, but also out into the global sphere.
So SO15 host a number of national functions for the whole of the national network, one of which is around international operations. The international operations function in SO15 effectively has two sides to it. One is around liaison with colleagues from overseas law enforcement who are based in London. And the other side is that we have a number of officers who are based overseas and are engaged overseas with their colleagues in law enforcement there, and also work with the whole of HMG overseas, so the other agencies that are based in the particular country, with a real alignment of mission. So you ask how effective that works. We've had a number of examples where that works really well, and a lot of it is based in that trust and confidence that I referred to earlier between us and the intelligence services, and how strongly that has built over the last 20 years, which enables us to interoperate overseas and complement one another's abilities in targeting the threat that's upstream, and in building resilience, which is a really, really key tenet of our work, to build the resilience overseas in other places where UK citizens may be found, whether they're tourists or working in business.
I hope you're going to tell me that there's been no change as a result of us leaving the EU. I know we've discussed this several times in Assembly Mayor's question time with the Mayor, but obviously our relationship has changed with the EU. Are we still as close with Interpol? And I presume it's made no difference to things like the European arrest warrant. I hope you're going to say no change.
So one of the key elements of our delivery as far as the EU was concerned was the EU Counter-Terrorism Board, which, as a result of EU exit, we temporarily lost our membership of, but were immediately invited back to join. So I think that's indicative of the strength of relationships we have with our colleagues overseas, and how quickly we're looking to basically rebuild those links and put them back in so that there was no loss of traction. And I think it's been well documented that there are some elements that are undoubtedly more challenging, but a huge amount of effort has gone in to mitigate those in the run-up and after EU exit.
I shall cross my fingers then that the mitigation to the challenges is going to be effective. Before the Chair starts to move me along, I need to move to another area. And I just wondered if you could provide us with a bit of an update on the implementation of the Iopcs' various recommendations. This is very recent, so you may not be able to give us much of an update yet, but following the investigation into the appalling incident that developed at just over the road, actually, in Fishmongers Hall, with the attack that was perpetrated that resulted in the deaths.
Sorry, Commander, before you answer, brevity would be appreciated.
There you go. I knew he was going to.
Understood. So IOPC had two reports into Fishmongers Hall, one concerning the fatal shooting by police of Usman Khan, and one into the management of Usman Khan as an offender. They made a single recommendation around the fatal shooting, which has been picked up by the College of Policing, concerning critical shots. They made further recommendations, a small number of further recommendations regarding offender management, which have been picked up under Project Semper, and all of which are being progressed.
Thank you. And finally, it's just about training. The new training and nominal management manual of guidance for officers managing terrorist offenders, is that now completely in place?
So that's one of the recommendations, and I'll give you a written answer on completely in place. I am confident that the operation in London are very much in alignment with what that manual includes, but whether all of that training has been delivered everywhere in the country, I don't know, so I'll give you a written answer. But in London, the Terrorist Offender Management Unit pre-existed before Operation Semper, and I am confident that we are delivering in accordance with the training that is within that manual.
Thanks, Richard.
Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you. Smith, please. Are there any implications for the Met from the first report of the Manchester Arena attack inquiry?
There will be. The first volume is very much around Protect. There was a meeting yesterday to review the detailed findings of that. Dawn, I might defer to you on this because it sits on the other side of the house from me, but there will be implications for London, if nothing else, to review our processes to ensure, for example, there is interoperability with BTP, where we both are operating. So, and how that fits into the protect duty going further forward. Dawn, I don't know if there's further we can say on that at the moment.
So yeah, the first report is still really valuable for us. There was a number, to quote, missed opportunities. So we're making sure we're looking at the detail of that, all the narrative, and turning the lens on ourselves to make sure that we've got those processes, as Richard says, in place. Prior to the report even coming out and through the inquiry, so we already instigated some work with our stadiums, more as a check, but also in preparation for them reopening. I'm confident already with our relationship with BTP in London, but the grey space around it is still a critical area. So it has formed some significant areas of our work where we've started to draw together the key people in charge and responsible for some of those grey spaces so that we can exercise and ensure we're clear on command and control. And then, yes, that will build over into the protect duty as well. So significant amount of work we will be taking, and it's coordinated nationally to make sure we can all learn across that first part.
That's good to hear, thank you. How many people have successfully engaged with the counter-terrorism e-learning so far during the Euros?
During the Euros, I don't know. I do have the numbers of how many people have engaged. I can do through May. We have a significant amount of people that have used all of our products. So far up to, that's 2,200 just in May. On a rolling year, we have hit just short of 20,000 people. For some of the ACT and SCAN packages, many of them were to be presented in person, but during COVID, we managed to transform it into an online so that we could maintain that amount of input. And we've had some extremely good uptake on that, and we'll be continuing it.
Excellent, thank you. Are there any emerging lessons to be learned from the experience of the Euros 2020? Other than that we're very good in England at playing football, especially any challenges associated with matches being held while still under the COVID-19 restrictions?
I think for us it's been more around the work with the fan zones. I mean, they've always been a significant issue for London, haven't they? But trying to manage that in a COVID compliant way, but also because it was one of the first larger sporting events to come online since lockdown. It was around how do we manage the immediate event, but also how do we manage around it, both to get that health balance and security balance. For my world, that's been a continuous issue for us, and most of it's been done through communication and public awareness that we want to get the security balance into it. So the learning for us has been around the communications, just as Richard said, trying to get the comms out to the public about where to go, where not to go, and that way we were able to police it safely and securely. That way everyone can enjoy the games, and hopefully we'll continue to this evening and even Sunday.
Absolutely, definitely.
Just to let you know, you're in your final few minutes.
Right, okay. Those communications, have you adapted language according to who's playing?
Yes, we do, and that is done through our national comms team on that.
Okay, one very last quick one. As international travel opens, do you foresee an increase on those going abroad to join terror organisations?
It's certainly going to be easier for them to do that. One of the things that we do monitor in the fashion that I've covered several times here are people who aspire to travel abroad, and we will seek to either divert them or if they are intent on criminal acts, to investigate and prosecute them for that. But clearly, as international travel opens up, the opportunities for people to move from one side to the other and to return are obviously that much greater. We do have counter-terrorism officers from SO15 at Heathrow and City Airport at St Pancras and at a number of other locations that serve this city as well, to look at those people as they go out and as they come back in. And Schedule 7 as a power is fantastically important to us in managing the potential threat that manifests through travel.
Is it easier to spot them at the moment because obviously there is limited travel and travel to certain countries? Is it therefore slightly easier at the moment because the volume's not so great?
I don't think I'd want to comment on behalf of my borders officers, who are extremely proficient at what they do,
of course they
about
are.
whether
Absolutely.
or not the change in circumstances has made their job easier or harder. It certainly made it different.
Okay, that's a fair comment. I'll leave it at that, Chair.
Thank you very much, Assembly Member. That brings us to the end of the questions. I'd like to thank our guests for their answers to our questions. And can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Noted. Can we also delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with Deputy Chairman, the party group lead members to agree any outputs arising from this meeting? Again, thank you very much. I release you to the wild. You can go back to your very busy jobs. I'm going to call a short adjournment while we swap over guests. Welcome back, members. For the last part of our meeting, we'll be having a hearing the views and concerns of the Daniel Morgan family following the publication of the independent panel report. We are joined today by Alistair Morgan. Good morning. Is it still morning? Good afternoon, even. The brother of Daniel Morgan. Thank you for attending this meeting with us today. Our members have been very keen to have this session, so I hope it'll be very beneficial to you and the ongoing inquiry, quite frankly. I'm going to start, as is our tradition, by taking the first question. As soon as I finish this question. Sorry, I have 100 million pages here, not the question all else. Here we go. Can you describe the experience of you and your family in engaging with the Metropolitan Police since your brother's murder?
I've actually written a book about it, which was published about 5 years ago, and that it was a pretty... To ask me to encapsulate that in a sentence is impossible, but in preparation for the meeting here, I have made some very brief notes under about six different headings, not in any particular order, but of things that I would...
I tell you what, Anson, why don't we move on to the second question, because you're correct, that is a very broad question. Yeah. And through the progress of this meeting, you will be able to go through your notes, I'm sure, and at any point you want to stop or change the direction, or you want to address something in your notes directly, just indicate to myself, and we can make that happen. As I say, some of my members have a deep level of experience in this, sure. and will be able to help you through that process. Yeah. I'm going to pass over to Assembly Member Duval to let him start with his line of questioning.
Alistair, I've got two questions. I'm going to start with my second one first. Okay. And I think you understand that, because over the years, people that have come into contact with you understand that. But I think in terms of us taking evidence today in preparation for our next meeting with the panel and police officers, I think members of this committee really do need to understand that the timeline of events since your brother's death revealed something of the agonies of the family. I think the panel reflect that in their report, so that you faced during that period of the aftermath of dealing with various agencies, including the police. And no one's been brought to justice. We understand that. But can you just explain to the members of this committee what that's meant to you and your family, and how this has impacted on the relationship that you've had with the police and the criminal justice system, and even politicians that you've met with?
Yeah. I mean, I've been through I'm now on my 8th commissioner, just as a sort of example of this. And one of my intentions was to talk briefly about my experience of these individuals, and it's not a very flattering one, I have to say that. Some of them I had nothing to do with. Some of them I met personally, but a couple of them stand out, if you like, in the worst possible way to me. There's Peter Imbert to begin with. It's a long way back. John Stevens, and latterly Cressida Dick. These are the three that stick out in my mind most as being reprehensible in their behaviour. And others have been less prominent. I mean, I could also mention Paul Stevenson, Paul Stevenson, who had to resign because of his relationship with the News of the World. And as you probably all know, the News of the World played a very sinister role in this story. And I could enlarge on that, but I'll skip over. I'll continue, and I'll say we've been through 5 investigations. One of them, I think, lasting 6 years. One which now latterly, I've been told, was not actually an investigation into my brother's murder, and I can comment on that as well. But we've also been through an inquest, a 2-year High Court disclosure battle, something else now, what's that? Yeah, the longest pre-trial hearing in British criminal history, lasting nearly 2 years before the collapse of the last prosecution. And then on top of that, we've had this 8-year inquiry. So I would say, I think the only way I can describe all of this is to say that the Met have colonised my life for 3.5 decades.
And to be fair, it would be true to say that actually the impact of dealing with those many investigations, non-investigations, inquest, and the fact of not bringing someone to justice has compounded the hurt that you and your family, but also the loss of confidence in institutions that you're dealing with. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's absolutely fair to say. And I just lost a thread there, but I'll come back. It'll come back to me, I'm sure. Yeah, it's been extremely difficult. And one of the things that one of the subjects I wanted to talk about in my little list here is what it's like whistleblowing, if you like. And my experience of this is obviously very long. And I would say that that you need certain conditions in place to be able to survive something like this. One of them, and I've been extraordinarily lucky. And I say this because there's not everybody that had the support that I've had in various ways. So think on that. I urge all of you, think on that when you think about how hard, how it's like climbing. It's been like climbing Everest for me, this experience. And even now when I come in here and I feel like my job isn't done, it's still not done. What else? Sorry, my head's going all over the place at the moment.
It's very understandable.
Yeah.
Very understandable, Alistair. Let's just let's take it away from that. But I would be grateful, Chair, if we could, if you feel it's appropriate, at the end of the meeting, if there's something that you think we should know, that maybe that you're prepared to share your notes with the rest of the committee, so we get a general feeling of that, if it's appropriate.
Yeah,
but maybe that's a conversation to be had.
And that reminds me that I also wanted to say I've been 5 television documentaries have been made on this, right? In which I've either pushed the TV companies or persuaded them to do something about it. But that's another additional thing that you have to go through, and I don't like being on television, I don't like, but I did it in many ways as a means of protection for myself, keeping a high profile myself, having to do that because on occasions I have feared reprisals from the people concerned, and I've feared for my family, I've feared for my, all my extended family. I mean, I can remember at one stage we had a death threat. I had a death threat on the telephone on one occasion, and it scared me. Thinking about what happened to my brother and the people behind it, it scared me. And I can remember going down with my partner, my disabled partner, down to her car every morning, feeling like I had to escort her out of the building and watch like this, almost to the extent of looking under the car, for bombs, and I mean that kind of thing. And speaking of that now, I think if you'll allow me to just improvise, or I remember reading just a couple of days back in the report about an officer called Roy Clark, and he was responsible for misleading my family grossly in a meeting I had with him in New Scotland Yard, where he described the first inquiry as honest and thorough, if not innovative, I think were his very words, and the Hampshire investigation as gosh, I can't remember, but he was endorsing it. And I read the other day that he had, in private internal correspondence with Met, described me as being verging on paranoia. And I just remember feeling I was very tired at the point that I read that. I felt like just sitting down on the sofa and bursting into tears. I don't cry easily, but I mean, that's how I felt. That this guy's a loony. He lies about the, and then this is the real point with this thing. He went off to lead the IPCC. He was the director of investigations at the IPCC. Now that, to me, exemplifies the kind of institutional corruption that I've experienced here.
And it is the attitudinal stroke culture of the interactions that you and your family had that compounds some of the hurt that comes through the panel's inquiry, or in terms of some of the issues you've had. I mean, to be honest, Chair, we should pay some recognition. We wouldn't have had this public inquiry because there are times when other people would have said, let it go. But it was down to you and your family, your supporters in some ways, of bringing it on to reach a public inquiry, isn't it? Because you'd made a number of representations for a public inquiry, and subsequently it was agreed by Theresa May, who was then the Home Secretary, to get us to where we were. So is that in terms of you dealing with those people, and not just in terms of the suffering, no family, your activities that led Roy Clark, who I believe wrongly, because I've read that bit of the report as well, to say that actually you were just searching for the truth. You just wanted the job done properly. You were ensuring and following up that they carried out the right task.
I can remember my sister walking out of the meeting. Bob Quick was there, and they were talking, and she said, I'm just not going to listen to this anymore. I'm afraid I can't even listen to this anymore. And she walked out, And in the notes, it was put something like, she did use, I think, a sort of low-level expletive when she walked out. But, sorry,
okay, that's fully understandable.
Oh yeah, can I return to some of the things you were saying there? Now, politicians, right? The issues that you brought up. You mentioned politicians, and sometimes my communications with politicians have been as painful as dealing with the police. And I can remember in one particular instance when we had my lawyer had sent in a submission or a request, I'm not quite sure what the right legal term is, for a judicial inquiry to the Home Secretary, who was then David Blunkett. Now, despite his recent comments on Twitter about this, he refused to see, couldn't be bothered to see us, or thought we weren't even worth seeing, and passed the matter down to Hazel Blears. And I can remember sitting in that meeting and thinking, no, I was thinking, the Commissioner has misled you, Minister. You are being misled again and again and again. And they were taking the Hampshire investigation as being a kind of the grounds on which they were saying that, and that, if you read the account of that in the report, I think is one of the most disgraceful investigations I've ever heard of, and endorsed by the Met. No independence. They had their own stooge, I would describe it, on the investigation, and politicians. Again, and I was astonished, to be quite honest, that a Conservative Home Secretary. I was bitterly disappointed in the Labour Home Office, and they're, brushing me off like a fly, really. And that put many years on our campaign. And I wanted that because I'd watched the experience of the Lawrence family, where a public inquiry had led ultimately to convictions. And it was only the pressure and the scrutiny that was put on the police by the judicial inquiry that prompted them to do this. And that's, at various stages, that has been my point, after meeting Hampshire, after having been through 3, in inverted commas, inquiries into Daniel's murder, that was when I met Roy Clark, and that's what I wanted. I wanted such pressure to be put on them that they couldn't wriggle around or duck and dive or lie anymore, but again, that set back our campaign for justice, and ultimately I think it put the mockers on it, completely.
Okay, let's. So, what do you believe should be the key priorities of the Metropolitan Police following the publication of the independent report? What do you think are some of the key bits that you want to see happen? So, you've got the panel recommendations. There may well be some other things that you think you would chip in. What do you think you would want them to do following this publication?
I think deep cultural change. That is what I would be looking for in that organisation. Nothing less than that. I don't think anything less than that is worthy of this country, really. Recommendation. I think I've read the recommendations and I think they're excellent. Duty of candour, above all, I think would be the most relevant to me. But they're equally other weighty. I read through them again last night, and they're heavyweight recommendations. And I would say I'd like to move on to talk in depth about my experience with Cressida Dick as well, if I may. Can I do that now? Does that make sense?
I think there may well be questions later on, but it's down to the chair. But I've got no objection of how you.
I can save that. I think I can save that. I'll wait with that. I think that's what I probably think should be the last thing I discuss.
Yes.
On this.
There's a number of, I think, some questions around disclosure that some of my other colleagues are asking questions on.
There's a few questions later on that might make it a bit more of an obvious place to have that discussion. Caroline Pidgeon, Assemblyman Pidgeon.
Thank you, Barrett. Thank you for coming in today to talk to us about this and for everything you've done to try to get justice. And I've been wading my way through this impressive report, but it's a sorry read for everyone of what has gone on. I was wondering, what was your reaction and your family's reaction to the Met's response to the publication of the independent panel's report?
Yeah, that's one of the big things that I wanted to talk about, but since you're asking me now, I'll take it now. I mean, we've had a report there that it almost itemises the huge number of occasions when officers have acted in a way which has been designed, rather than to be honest or to achieve justice, designed to protect the organisation from unwarranted protection of the reputation of the organisation. And my view on what a number of senior officers have said since the publication of the report is that they are committing exactly the same sin, if you like, as has been copiously demonstrated in the report. And I think, you know, I've spent some time thinking about this, and I think it's actually quite clever and sly how they've dealt with this, because they've been, you know, oh, the Met is not institutionally corrupt. So the public gets the impression of brown envelopes flying everywhere and, you know, documents being destroyed and trials subverted and all that kind of thing. And that kind of catch-all definition of corruption completely disguises what the real issue here is, and that is the protection of their reputation above all things, in my view. I mean, there are notable exceptions, a few notable exceptions among the people who've been dealing with this over the years, just as there are a few notable exceptions among the politicians I've dealt with over the years too. But yeah, it seems to me, you know, who are these people? Are they serious people? Are they actually willing to have they even read it? Are they just propagandists? You know, and I won't apologise for saying that I think this country is just full of propaganda at the moment in all kinds of ways, you know, and from government, and it's upsetting to me to listen to this PR. What shall I say? BS is the best way I can describe it. And I think it's damaging. I think it's damaging that they're not being honest with the public about it. But then I would now say, well, hey ho, par for the course is how I would look at it, you know. And I'm kind of inured after 32 years to lying and weasel words is how I would describe these from the leadership, in particular from the leadership of the Metropolitan Police. So, yeah.
The Metropolitan Police would say that they have apologised. I would like to know what your view is on their apology, and was it sufficient? And you may have seen I picked this up 2 weeks ago with the Deputy Commissioner when he was before.
I did. Now I have received, I've seen all of the stuff about, you know, yeah, a lot of my, you know, grit and determination and all the rest of it, and yeah, you know, there's quite a lot of that involved, but I've received a letter of apology from the Commissioner in similar terms, you know, about a paragraph or you know, a very short letter, nothing whatsoever about her own role in delaying, obstructing. I mean, one of the hardest things for me was, you know, to see my mother die 3 years ago before the end of this inquiry. And I mean, my mother carried this thing. It was an open wound to her, even, you know, for 30 years, even on her deathbed, you know. And that's the kind of, I don't know, what I'd describe as psychological brutality that's inflicted on people in my position, and that went on for years and years and years. Yeah.
And in terms of the Met's response, whilst they have said for many years, looking through the report and in their response, that they accept that there was corruption in the original investigation, it seems to me that they are not accepting any other corruption throughout, or that it currently exists, which is precisely what this report comes up with and discusses. Institutional corruption. Is that your take too? And is that one of your frustrations, that how do we move forward if they won't even accept that there is a problem?
And that's why I said earlier, my job isn't finished.
Yeah.
You know? And I mean, I think, well, it takes a a kind of educated mind, at least in terms of this particular case, to actually discern the, what I would call duplicity, not weasel words, if you like. I think it's the best description I can give to what they've been saying. And I have to say, I was also disappointed in the mayor's comment on it. Nobody in their right mind in this country thinks that the implication is kind of that all police officers are corrupt. You know, it's an easy kind of step when you hear talking about institutional corruption. But everybody, every sensible person in this country knows that the huge majority of police officers do their best, honest, work for the community, and they do a very difficult job. Nobody but a fool, I think, could deduce anything other than that. That there is corruption, I mean, yeah, it's pretty obvious too. The cases happen on a fairly regular basis, although I think they usually just pluck the low-hanging fruit to sort of beat themselves on the chest about how good they are for propaganda purposes, but that's, yeah.
Finally, are you fearful that whilst they may react to some of the recommendations which are the more straightforward, yes, we've improved our investigation methods, yes, we've done X, Y, Z, and we root out corrupt officers, that they aren't going to do the cultural shift that you think is needed, which is what's come out of this report?
Yeah, no, I don't think. I think they'll have to be dragged kicking and screaming to any kind of. First of all, acknowledgement is the first thing. Until they acknowledge the substance and the conclusions of this report, then you might as well talk to a door, you know. Was my view.
Yeah. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Chair.
Assemblymember Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much for coming. I don't think any of us can really fully appreciate what you and your family have been through, because it's just astonishing the length of time that this has taken. So we really do appreciate you being here. I wanted to ask you something about the amount of time that it's taken from the independent panel report. When it was set up in 2013, the then Home Secretary assured your family that the panel would receive exceptional and full disclosure of all relevant documentation, including that held by all relevant government departments and agencies and by the police and other investigative and prosecuting authorities. And it was envisaged that the panel's work would be completed within 12 months, so from 2013 to 2014. Now, you know, you've just smiled as I said that, but as we all know, it sadly took a lot longer than that to complete it. When were you first told that the investigation was going to take longer than the initial 12-month estimate?
Well, I suppose I remember thinking when it was a senior civil servant, I think it was Theresa May's, not PPS, what was the other word for the official who's...
Private Secretary?
Private Secretary, that's right. He was telling us, that's the thing that he came out with, and I can remember talking about the disclosure, because we had long discussions with him about the terms of reference and the disclosure, and I remember saying to him very early, I said, because my experience with the Met, you know, I had to fight for 2 years and eventually go to the High Court to get one document out of them, you know, and he was, I think, totally naively optimistic about how they, you know, because I can remember hearing, you know, full and them saying, I think it was possibly Bernard Hogan Howe at that time, who said, oh yes, you'll have our full cooperation, and I just knew, I thought, this is complete nonsense, you know, they just spout out this kind of propaganda and expect everyone to swallow it. But I had serious I thought Theresa May's PPS was incredibly naive in some ways, you know. And in fact, I found many politicians over the years totally naive about police corruption, you know, and how they deal with it. And it's been, you know, I inhabit a completely different universe from the one that they live in. But it went on. I suppose to answer your question now, it got to a point, say, where a couple of years, after 2 years, I don't think they'd had a single document. That's how it worked out. And so I thought, I was thinking about the private secretary and thinking, yeah, I was right. You know, this is going to be hell, basically. And I knew it would be from the start.
I mean, essentially, you were, not surprisingly, really, by 2013, you were either cynical or you were finding it hard to suspend your disbelief at the idea that it could even take a year. When did you ever get a formal statement from the Met Police and the Home Office to provide you with any kind of reason as to the delays?
Never.
That's never happened.
No,
they never explained the delays. I mean, obviously, you've got your own explanation in the sense that they have to be dragged kicking and screaming to just produce one document, as you were saying.
Yeah.
So, but they never explained why it took so long. Wow.
No, they never explained. But that's one of their things. Never explain, never apologise. That's one of their. I heard that's one of their kind of.
So it's taken over 2 years to get to the point where the documents were released.
Getting documents.
Similarly, there's also been a lot of revelations within the report regarding access to things like the Holmes database. It took until 2021 for the panel to be provided with the level of access that they've been providing since 2015. If you're able to, can you say anything about your experience of that and what involvement you had in trying to urge the Met to move forward with what the panel were asking for?
I personally never communicated with the Met during this process. I didn't, you know, I just thought, well, this is a panel of inquiry appointed by the government, by the Home Secretary herself. They seem, well, the report on the piece, the section of the report on cooperation, it speaks for itself, you know. And I'll come back to Cressida Dick after this, but from that, having read that, I thought and there are more things that aren't in the report that I must tell you about afterwards, that she put every possible obstacle and delay that she could. That's my interpretation of reading that thing. In particular, Holmes, which was vital for the inquiry. She put every obstacle and took every possible chance to delay. And in fact, I think I might as well go into the other stuff now while I'm talking about it, if you don't mind.
Well, I was just going to say that the report itself, it's not just your view, but the report itself clearly states that the panel, the investigating panel, felt that the Met has and continues to obfuscate, conceal and deny failures, and in their view that was to try and protect the Metropolitan Police's reputation. And obviously one of the problems in this was delays in obtaining information from the Met through Holmes, which you've just referred to, and you're being very specific about who you feel is responsible for that. I mean, I'm very happy to hear more comments on how that process went, but also any other more recent examples in relation to the inquiry that stand out to you?
Well, I would say, I think I need to go a little bit back, if you don't mind,
sure,
to make this point. I first met Cressida Dick at a point when we were actively seeking a judicial inquiry. Now, the prosecution finally collapsed in 2011, in March 2011. Within a couple of months, I would say maybe 3, my solicitor had prepared a request, I don't know the right, submission to the Home Secretary, a substantial document asking for a judicial inquiry.
Do you mean a judicial review?
No, a judicial
A
inquiry.
judicial inquiry.
A full judicial inquiry, judge-led, with all of the statutory powers of a judicial inquiry. Now that went off to Theresa May, I would say, about June 2011. Now, in the correspondence we had with her, from quite an early stage, she said that we were frustrated because she wouldn't make a decision even after several months. And the result, on further probing, we found out that she had requested from the Met a report on the collapse of the trial. Now, this report, it took them a whole year, right? We'd already been through 25 years of dealing with them. They took a whole year to prepare that report. And I can remember that we were ourselves were due to receive that report in June, the middle of June. It was delayed again and again and again, as is almost always the case in my experience. And then finally, we were told that we would receive the report in June. It was in June 2013. So more than 15 months after the collapse of the trial. And this was to be at the offices of the Crown Prosecution Service at that time. I don't know where they are now, but I attended with my solicitor, my partner. I think my sister was there, but I cannot be quite sure of that. But we were given, they came in, we were presented with a 30-page report. And I can remember we were given, I think, half an hour to read it before Cressida Dick, as it happened, and another officer called Simon Foy came in to discuss this. And I remember we were leafing through it, and I turned to my solicitor to see his reaction to it, and he said to me, one of my assistants could have prepared this in 3 weeks. Yeah, that was what he said. Now that really, and it was all cut and paste from bits of transcripts, and the whole thing in its entirety was just a shoddy little document. The word corruption was not even mentioned in it, And anyway, in comes Cressida Dick and Simon. They come into the room where we're sitting, rather large room. And I think my solicitor opened with the comment that he made to me. And I can then remember, it made me extremely angry with her, with these people coming along, making us wait a year for this tatty little excuse for a report. And I remember it made me very, very angry. And I remember then taking Cressida Dick through what I'd experienced, in brief, taking her through what I'd experienced over the past 25 years. Cover-ups, lies, including mentioning people like John Stevens in particular. And she sat there, stony-faced, completely stony-faced. And I did say at one point, and there are, and I won't deny, examples of good policing in this, efforts made by honest police officers to get to the truth in this. Too late, unfortunately, but then she said, at least they did something, I thought, well, I'm in a position today where, I'm sorry I'm going on a bit, but that was, and now I have to move. So as far as I'm concerned, she was responsible for delaying a shoddy little report. But then it doesn't stop there. And this isn't in the report either, I don't think. So the panel started, and then after about 3 months of the panel starting, we knew that there was problems in the panel. And these involved the chair, Cressida Dick, and the chair of the panel. And apparently, Cressida Dick had been trying to get the panel chairman, with some success at that point, to be the only recipient of certain sensitive documents. In other words, Sir Stanley Burnton was going to be sort of hived off from the rest of the panel, and he would be given. Now, all the panel members are qualified and security vetted to look at this, but she wanted only him to have this report. I think it was manipulation, manipulation of Sir Stanley's ego.
Alistair,
he's a former High Court judge.
Thank you so much for going through
but
that for
I still
me.
want to say, I've still got more to say, which I want to say, right? Now, that caused the resignation of Stanley Burnton when the family...
Right.
When the panel found out that he had been corresponding with them without her.
Right.
And a year went by before effectively the panel... So that was a delay of a year, on top of all the other stuff that she did.
It's...
Sorry, now
so can I interject at this point? Answer, please be assured you can go at this at any order you like and bring out points as they come to you. But I'm just going to move to my next member.
That was why I slightly cut in on you, because I knew that the chair was probably going to.
But
thank you so much for.
That's okay.
It's painful for you. It's not. Yeah.
And let me make the point.
Sorry.
Sorry. So let me make the point. When we come to the end of the meeting, if there's anything you feel you haven't conveyed, we will find another way for you to convey that. If you want to do it written,
that's good.
If we have another informal meeting, we will find a way for you to convey that information. So please don't feel under pressure to get it all out now.
Yeah.
I'm going to go over to Assembly Member Hall, who will continue.
Thank you. Hello, Alistair. Do you and your family believe that this is just down to the failings of the Metropolitan Police, or do you think there's a wider responsibilities from others that need to be considered?
Yes, I do. I'm not the only person making serious allegations against, or making unflattering comments, should we say, about the police's handling of this. I know that Lady Britain has made some trenchant comments about the Met's lack of a moral compass, and or I have at least read this. And
yes,
I think
that's correct. But and I agree, and that's a situation that we have also in this committee looked into. But I mean, do you think about your own situation? Do you entirely blame the Metropolitan Police, or do you think there were things that other people or other institutions or whatever else? Do you think there were other people that didn't help the
Hampshire
situation?
Police, for example. But there's a perfectly adequate description of their, and of course the Police Complaints Authority at the time. As far as I can see, there was a conspiracy between the Metropolitan Police leadership, the leadership of Hampshire Police, and the Police Complaints Authority, as it was then called, to suppress, I think Baroness Alone called it, the possibility of police involvement in the murder, because Paul Goodridge made some very astonishing and disturbing allegations to them, which were simply just ignored by all three bodies, and anybody who wanted to get to the bottom of that would have listened and examined what he had to say, but they didn't want to. And if you look at that conspiracy, the pathetic investigations, the first two, and alongside the allegations of police involvement, you can draw whatever inference you like from it, in my view.
Okay, and do you have any insight on how the Metropolitan Police should better engage with victims' families?
I think that's dealt with the... well, be honest. Just be honest. As simple as that. No lies, no... as family liaison and all that. I know my solicitor took a very different view from the panel on that, and I'm very sorry that he isn't here with me today because he has years and years and years of experience in dealing with families and police misconduct. I mean, in my view, he's one of the best. He's very ill at the moment, but and I think the panel should talk to him too.
Okay, thank you. I'll leave it at that for the moment. Thank you.
Okay, Assembly Member Russell.
Hello, and thank you very much for being here with us today. I just want to go back to the, as a kind of opener for my main question, to the idea or the concept of institutional corruption, because that seems to be something very clear that the panel has found, that there are failings that don't automatically fall into the definition of corruption, but when those failures cannot reasonably be explained as genuine error and indicate dishonesty for the benefit of the organisation, in the panel's view, they amount to institutional corruption. So it's like a sort of new definition of a thing called institutional corruption. And I just wonder whether you consider that that idea, that new concept of institutional corruption, is useful in understanding what's happened here, but also in understanding the actions that need to be taken going forwards.
I do absolutely agree. Absolutely, I think the panel clearly defined its. It gave a very clear definition of what it considered to be corruption, and then gave example after example after example example.
So this brings me to my main question, which is that we're here to scrutinise the mayor, and the mayor has already recognised that there are issues between the community and the Metropolitan Police in his action plan for transparency, trust and accountability. Now this recognition of the mayor's primarily came about because of a lack of trust, particularly within the black and minority ethnic community, and all the kind of work around Black Lives Matter. Now, do you think that the mayor's action plan should be extended to reflect your family's experience and the findings of the independent panel, for instance, with this concept of institutional corruption?
Absolutely, because to me this is a kind of insidious and corrosive corruption, because it involves layer upon layer upon layer of different kind of untruths and distortions and weasel words or whatever you like, and my instinct is that this kind of thing will rot an institution from the inside, and that will destroy it ultimately if it gets to, if it gets a grip, and as it has clearly in this particular case. And I'd also go on to say that this isn't. I would say institutional corruption. Look at all the deaths in custody and the complete failure over years, decades, even centuries, to have anyone held accountable for it. Mm-hmm. I've described that as a form of institutional corruption. Yep. I would describe, in my view, racism is a form of corruption. You could call it a form of corruption because it's a deviation from the constable's oath to police without fear or favour. Mm-hmm. And in my view, there's a lot of fear and favour, both fear and favour going into policing at the moment. For example, the Electoral Commission found that I think, the Vote Leave campaign had broken the law. No investigation there,
That takes us into a whole extra bit of territory.
Yeah. And I'd argue that people from Vote Leave...
I'm going to give it back to the chair.
Thank you very much. I'd argue that people from Vote Leave would have a different view and say they had more scrutiny than anybody else. For a little balance there. Alistair, first and foremost, let me ask you, Is there anything else, particularly in your notes, or just come to you now that you'd wish to convey before?
I'll just have a quick flick through.
You have a quick flick through
before where I feel that, yeah, I mean, I don't think that I could. Yeah, I think I'd like to talk about John Stevens a little bit. Now, Stevens and the News of the World. Now, the News of the World was using Southern investigations throughout, even during murder investigations. These people were selling information to journalists, right, left and centre. Now, when they had the probe in Southern Investigations Office, I think they uncovered 30 crimes in 1 week. Now, that is how the corruption spread from this, in my view. Now, Bob Quick prepared a report on it. Now, that report got lost. So no journalists were prosecuted for that. They were let off the hook, Southern Investigations, for that, and all they got them for was some disgraceful, well, not all, but it was a disgraceful conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. I'm sorry.
That's fine. So
I've lost
at this
my
point,
thread.
can I just bring in Assembly Member Duval?
On that, because the panel look into the issues of, I think it's well established that Southern Investigations and Key Suspects worked for a number of media organisations, but News International is mentioned specifically in the way that they tried to pursue a story to discredit an investigating officer at a crucial time of the investigation. I think it was just to reopen one of the last phases of the investigations, the last two, I think, that they pursue this particular officer. Would you say that was also one of the areas which the police failed to act upon? Because it sounds like from the panel, and reading what the panel say, they don't mention it specifically as an action arising, but the conversation takes place informally with News International, of where News International is corrected on some of their assumptions, and then it's let go. It's not pursued. It's not an action issue of saying, well, actually, this is not acceptable, and particularly why you're doing it at this stage of the inquiry, knowing full well that the people asking the questions knew that Key Suspects were working for News International at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, and then the commissioner at the same time as this, sort of around the time, was going off to the Ivy with Rebecca Brooks, and then afterwards, after this disgraceful collaboration, shall we say, between and cover-up ultimately of these issues, it only came out after the hacking scandal. After this, he goes off and works for the News of the World. I mean, they had they'd done such damage, the News of the World, with their own criminality. And I mean, the trials are still going on today. It's still in the courts.
And is it fair to say, Alistair, that if Levinson 2 had taken place, that you would have made representations on Levinson 2 about police relationships with the police at this particular time?
Absolutely, but
so you would have pursued it if given the opportunity.
Yeah, and I would still say that it's a necessary inquiry, Levinson 2. Absolutely.
Okay, Chair, can I just ask a final question? It goes back to an earlier question that the comment did in terms of the Met's response. And really, in terms to understand not just your family's response, but in terms of all the years, in terms of the response. And I'm not wishing to put words in your mouth, but I think it's important for us to understand what their response to the panel of one of, if I heard you right, if I read you right, that it was too defensive, too owning in on the non-cooperation, rather than the acceptance of failure, corruption, and some of the issues that had occurred over the years and the interactions with your family. Is that in essence what you view their response of? And, and in that sense, fine.
I concur entirely with that.
I just want to be clear about that. So when we ask them then to think about how they went through their response. Chair, it's very important, and I think you were going to say, you also mentioned, Alistair, that your lawyer is very ill. But if there is any written evidence that we could take from your lawyer, including any of those notes that you feel able to share in a written form, so we capture and be able to digest what you say, if we could have that, we'd be very grateful as a committee before our next meeting, which I think, Chair, is on the 21st of July. It would help the committee, and it would help the people that support the committee in framing some of the questions that might need to be asked.
Well, what happens, we're in contact with Alistair's solicitor. We will facilitate that, or even try to have an informal meeting by video call if appropriate, if possible. We're in the process of working through that at the moment, as you see. Our last member, Caroline, please.
A small question, Alistair. You talked about this meeting, I think you said it was at the CPS offices, with Cressida Dick and Simon Foy to go through this flimsy report. In what capacity was Cressida there? What were you told? Because at that time, she was the Assistant Commissioner in charge of Counter-Terrorism. She was not in charge of Specialist Operations, which she moved to the year after. So I'm not clear in what hat she had on when she was at that meeting. No. It wasn't within her remit.
I didn't even know that. I mean, I just assumed, because she had come with this report, that she was in some way...
Unless she'd been asked by the Commissioner to look, it just seems it's outside her area.
We might need to check timelines, because it might have been when she was a commander, and I think she had responsibility for serious and organised crime.
Because 2011 to 2014...
or a Deputy Assistant Commissioner. Oh, 2014.
2011 to 2014, she was the Assistant Commissioner in charge of Counter-Terrorism. 2014, she got moved to Specialist Operations and then she left. And this was in 2013. So it wasn't in her area. So unless the Commissioner had said, would you do this piece of work, I don't understand what her role would have been and why she would even be part of this.
Well, she was, I mean, I gave her, in a very short space of time, in the meeting, a very pretty, how should I say, brutal assessment of what I'd seen up until that point, because I wasn't in the mood to doff my cap and bow and scrape to senior officers in the Met. But I don't know, I think she was, I can just be speculating, but I think that her response since then has been possibly a result of that thing, because what I was saying was extremely damaging to the Met, and maybe she was put there in place to take the flak. I don't know, or to manage the corruption, if you like, manage it.
Yeah, it just didn't make sense to me when you look at the dates, why at that point she would have been involved. That's all. Maybe that's something we need to think about. Thank you very much.
Alistair, that brings us to the end of our meeting. Can I firstly say thank you for attending? Sorry, have I missed someone?
I was just going to say, Mr. Morgan, you started by saying deep cultural changes needed by the Met. That was going to be my question to the Commissioner. Is that fundamentally what you're asking the Commissioner, rather than talk about the past in terms of the future? Is that the one thing you'd really like us to basically hold the Commissioner to account when she's sitting in your very seat?
What I would like is for you to ask the Commissioner to resign. That is the only... I'm tired of dealing with it. I'm absolutely sick to death of dealing with these people. I've had it up to here. And I think that to allow her to behave in the way that she has towards my family, the way it's harmed my family with waiting and festering and anxiety and distrust, I don't, no, I think she's got to go, and I have to say that.
No, absolutely.
Okay.
I don't blame you, sir. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Now, is there anybody else? There is no time for anybody else. We have 59 seconds. I will say as much just now. You're completely right. As my member was about to say, as a member, Assembly Member Hall was about to say, of course you've made lots of allegations against the Commissioner, but she will have the ability to respond because she will be before us. And I just want to put that on the record. We as a committee are trying to hit all sides of the story. Alistair, I thank you for your attendance this morning. I understand how these things can be intimidating. If there's anything in your notes or anything you think our members need to know, please do contact the committee and we will facilitate that, make sure it gets straight to our members.
Okay.
Again,
I mean,
thank you so
what
much.
I've got here is just very flimsy handwritten reminders to myself, you know.
As said, that's completely fine. You can share them or not. As you can see, a number of the committee have deep understanding and history in this case, so probably could still derive value from them. Our oh my God! Stop. Sorry, well I have to keep you lot in line, don't I? A number of our committee have great expertise in this area, and our secretariat are very expert in making things palatable. So please do feel to pass them if you can. I'd like to thank you for your attendance and just apologise on our behalf just how tough all this has been for you and your family. Please feel free to leave now because we just have a few small items of formal business that we need to get through. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Can I also ask the committee to delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with the deputy chairman and party group lead members to agree any outputs arising from this meeting? Agreed. That brings us to the end of our proceedings. Thank you all.